Welcome back to Collins Country. I just recently finished my first season of maple tapping and making maple syrup. It was so fun and it was honestly really easy to do. So if you're looking for a video that has all the information you need on how to tap a maple tree, on how to collect maple sap, and how to make maple syrup, this is the video for you. Come on, let's get to it. I got this information from a couple of different maple tapping websites that I found really helpful. I'll put links to those websites in the description below. And then I also got a book from all these about maple tapping that I read. So the first one is the temperature. The ideal temperature is when it's below freezing at night, but above freezing during the day. And in Kentucky, that's typically around February. Second is avoid old holes. If you're tapping a maple tree that's been tapped before and you see a hole in the tree, you want to go over 2 inches and up at least 8 inches. For me, I'm tapping fresh maple trees that to my knowledge have never been tapped before, so I don't have to worry about that. Number 3, you want to use a 5/16 inch drill bit. And when you drill into the tree, you only want to drill in 1.5 inches. You'll notice in the video that we taped that off with a piece of duct tape at the 1.5 inch mark because it's really easy to over drill and you don't want to do that. And you also want to drill at a slightly upward angle. That way the sap naturally flows downward. Number 4, you want to insert the spile or spout, as some people would call it, with the rubber mallet, and it's actually a lot easier to do than you think it would. Number 5 is that you want to stop tapping and inserting that when you hear like a thud or a click. I heard a thud sound, so I can recognize that now that I've done it. And you definitely don't want to overhammer because you can actually crack the wood or damage the trees. Number 6 is try to avoid tapping a tree more than once. My thought process when I was doing this was, oh, if I have a giant tree, I can tap it a couple times and get double the amount of sap out, but it doesn't really work like that. If you've got a lot of trees, just tap each tree once. You will get a little more sap out if you tap a tree multiple times, but you're definitely not going to get double. Now, there are parameters that I did find online for that. So step number 7 is if the tree is less than 18 inches in diameter, you're going to do 1 tap, but if it's greater than 18 inches, then you can technically tap twice. Number 8, so this is some good information. An average maple can produce 10 to 20 gallons of sap per tap. Smaller maple trees, you're looking at 5 to 10 gallons per tap. Ours were, average size maple trees. A couple of them were bigger. I only tapped 4 trees this year for my first year. And I want to say we probably got 5 to 10 gallons of sap off of each tree. Number 9, when you're picking a tree, my dad actually taught me this, the tight bark on maple trees actually represents a healthy tree. If the bark is more spread out, it's not technically as healthy of a tree. So you don't want to tap those. Tap the trees with the tighter bark. Number 10, fresh sap is 3% sugar. So it kind of tastes like sugar water. When you first start collecting the sap, you're going to think, holy crap, this is just water, because it basically is. But obviously when you turn it into maple syrup, it's very sugary. Now the ratio for making maple syrup, and I found this hard to believe until I've done this now, and it is 100% accurate, is that it's a 40-to-1 ratio, meaning that it takes 40 gallons to make 1 gallon of maple syrup. We ended up with like 25 gallons, and that ended up boiling down to 2 quarts, which is half a gallon. When you're collecting it each day, I would just go to my buckets and I would collect them and I would pour it all into one big bucket, or if I had a lot, I would actually just swap out the buckets. You can do it however you want, just get the maple sap out of the woods. And then the last one is cooking it down. So when you're cooking it down, you're going to want to start outside because it produces so much steam. The vast majority of that liquid that you have in those pans and in those buckets is going to boil out, and you don't want all that steam in your house. So we boiled all of it outside until we got down to like a half gallon, and then we brought it in and finished boiling it down from there. And it still took like 45 minutes to get it to the maple syrup, which I'll show you when we do that part of the video. You can make it thinner. It doesn't need to be super thick like molasses. I made it 2 different thicknesses, and one is darker than the other. I just know that you do want to get it to the certain temperature, which we're going to talk about here in just a second. And then once you get to that temperature, technically you can stop, or if you want it a little thicker, you can boil it a little bit longer. Anyway, that's kind of it. That's just the generic information that I put together because I felt like I didn't have one resource that just quickly concised everything you need to know about maple tapping into one small area. So that's it. If you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, let's get to it.
So if you end up getting an enclosed system that has tubes like these, definitely soak it in hot water and assemble that inside, because once you take it outside and it's cold, it is impossible to get together because that rubber or plastic does not want to stretch over your spiles. And the first tap is done. Only took us a couple minutes.
Tap number 2 is in. Tap number 3 is done. Tap number 4 is done. It's the next day and we are checking our maple taps, and I would like to report complete success. Look at this. Got about a half gallon in this bucket after day 1. You can actually see it dripping out of the tube. Got our bucket. Levi and I are going to head back to our maple trees to collect our maple sap and see how much we got.
This first bucket here had about a half a gallon.
Look at this one. Got over 3 gallons in this guy. Bucket number 3, also working very hard. Look at this. Almost 3 gallons in this one as well. Bucket number 4 though, he is the winner. Look at this. Over 4 gallons in this bucket in just 3 days. I'm winded. Oh my gosh, this is so successful that we have so much maple sap. I don't know how to successfully get it out of the woods. I mean, where these maple trees are at the bottom of this holler. It's steep to get out of this thing in all 4 directions. I gotta carry all this maple syrup out of here and Tractor Supply's out of lids. So I don't know how I'm gonna carry the buckets up there without lids because it's gonna all splash out. Anyway, this is so easy and so fun. If you have access to maple trees or you're trying to turn your home into a homestead, do this. You can involve the kids. It is a blast. Very rarely do you do a homesteading thing for the first time and it's 100% successful. But this one, oh my gosh, I've been a maple tapper for 3 days and I have almost 15 gallons of maple sap. I know I probably look like such a loser, but I'm literally so excited because this is awesome. This is like a homesteader's dream. We are boiling down maple sap today, and I would like to report that it's going very well. It's super easy, and we're having a really good time doing it. The first thing I do is when I have my bucket of maple sap like this, is that before I put it in there, James and I do it together, and I hold this above it, and we pour it through this to strain it. And what this is just a metal mesh colander and a piece of unbleached cheesecloth. Now, this pot here is a 7-gallon pot, but you definitely do not want to put 7 gallons in it because as you can tell, it boils a lot. And sometimes it boils really big. You don't want it to boil over. So we have not been putting more than 4 gallons in it at a time. So what we do is get it up to about here where the 4-gallon mark is, and then we boil it down to where it looks like there's a gallon in there, and then we add 3 more gallons. And so we're kind of keeping it around the 4-gallon mark. But so far, this has been going really well. This gas stove is really nice. We got it hooked up to our propane tank over there. And eventually we'd like to get a wood burning stove and do it all off grid. But for our first time doing this, we wanted to use a propane tank because it's a lot easier and it can be a lot faster to bring it to a boil than a wood stove can. So we're going to keep boiling this down until it gets about a gallon. Then we'll take it inside. We already made our first batch of maple syrup and this will be our second. So we'll show you how we did it. It's really easy.
First, you're going to transfer this into a smaller pot because if you use a pot as big as this 7-gallon one inside, as it boils down, it's only going to be like an inch high of syrup, and your thermometer most likely won't be able to get deep enough into that liquid to measure the temperature. Then you're going to keep boiling it down until that temperature starts to rise and reaches the temperature that is 7 degrees above the boiling point of water, which in Kentucky where I live at our elevation is 219 degrees. Then you're going to sterilize those jars by baking them in the oven at 250 for 10 minutes. And then you're going to sterilize those lids in a pot of water. Just bring it to a boil. Once it starts to boil, shut it off. They're ready to use. I'm still boiling down, but you'll see here that I actually transferred it a 3rd time to a smaller pot here just to keep the liquid high enough to where I could measure the temperature easily. And we just hit 219 degrees, so it's done. Now that it's done, we're going to get out all of our canning stuff and we're going to preserve it. So I went ahead and let it sit for about 5 minutes just so it wasn't actually boiling anymore, but it was still hot, and then I ladled it right into my jars. If I was planning on selling this maple syrup, I would run it through a filter here, but since it's just for us, I don't care if a little maple sugar gets in it, and actually, none got in there. It was just pure maple syrup. The amazing thing about maple syrup is that you don't actually have to process it, meaning you don't have to water bath it or put it in a pressure canner. And this is because maple syrup is boiled at such a high temperature, and it has such a high sugar content that you do not actually have to process it at all. Leave a small amount of headspace, about 1/4 inch, and then wipe that rim with some vinegar to keep it nice and clean and sterile. Then put on your lid, put on your band, tighten it down, and as it cools, you'll hear that ping, and that means it's sealed. There it is, our first set of maple syrup. It turned out perfect, and it's absolutely delicious. If you do not put a sterile lid on it and you just put a regular lid on it, its shelf life is good for about a year, but if it's canned properly and it seals, shelf life technically is good indefinitely.
So that's about it. As you can see, maple syrup making is pretty fun, pretty easy, and the product that you create is absolutely delicious and good for you compared to processed sugar from the store. So our goal is within the next couple of years to eliminate processed sugar from the store completely from our diet and live off of only honey from the honeybees we'll be getting this spring and maple syrup that we make from tapping our maple trees. So next year I'll probably tap 20 trees. And then just the last thing you need to know is you have to stop tapping once the buds are on the trees. And if you're starting to get cloudy sap out of the tree, that's another way to know you're done for the year. So anyway, we'll collect our buckets today. This will probably be the last day because it's warming up here in Kentucky. I don't see buds on the tree yet, but they're going to be there any second. So yep, that's it. Happy maple tapping season.
Good morning. We're eating breakfast this morning with the homemade maple syrup. Babe, what's the verdict?
Very good. I did a great job boiling this down.
Yes, you did. You were a good helper.
You did a good job tapping it.